Let's see who's out here. Okay, we're back. So, the last two talks, and you might have noticed Melissa by now. Uh, it's fair to say she's been deeply involved. But at the moment, she has two other roles to do, and I'll
development. What is like technical solution for what is going to transform their way of life, and what they think is going to transform their way of life, how they see mobile phones transforming their way of life. So I visited a number of health clinics before I started this output-based aid project. I visited a number of health clinics around Uganda, in Nakaseke, and a few other places. And every health center I visited, not every health center in Uganda, but every health center I visited had at least one person there with a personal mobile phone. And they used innovative charging solutions. Not all of them actually had electricity. Some of them actually had to take that mobile phone and hand it off to a bus driver, who then took it off to the nearest village where they charged it overnight and brought it back the next day. And they paid something about 50 cents to get that phone charged, and they would do that about once a week. And they use the phones for everything from emergency reporting, where they would either, if they had a case of TB show up, they would actually call the district health center and say, hey, I've got a case of TB, you should know about this right away. Or they would submit weekly health reporting forms via SMS, or they would use them to check salary and drug order status. When am I getting my salary? Am I getting paid? Or they would request transportation using the mobile phones, or they would do clinical consultations. The doctor's not here, even though they're supposed to be. Call the doctor and have them actually tell you what to do with this patient that showed up. And they worry about different things like how to have enough airtime to actually pay for the phone calls that they're doing. Do they have network coverage in that health clinic where they are? Or security. Mobile phones get stolen all the time. And that's one of the reasons why they actually like to use the catorches, the very cheap candy bar phones, because nobody really wants to steal the candy bar phones because they're so easy to get themselves. And so, knowing this, going into kind of a larger project, how do you move from kind of this knowledge into trying to implement an ICT solution? The other thing I noticed going into wandering through these health clinics and looking at actually other projects that have been implemented was that these health clinics were actually given these PDAs where they were using them to process these complicated forms and submit them over a network system to the Ministry of Health. They were basically reporting all of their outpatient statistics to the Ministry of Health using this complicated networking system. And they realized that the PDAs that they were using actually had Microsoft Excel on them. They said, oh, Excel. I've heard that Excel has all these other features. And so then they started using the Excel spreadsheets to actually keep track of their patient logs and keep track of their inventory. And completely independent of this project that they were a part of, they started appropriating these devices for their own uses. And instead of just writing out all of their patient logs only in these exercise books where they normally write them, they started actually also entering them in on the PDAs and then beaming those files back and forth to each other. So I said, well, sometimes all of these ICT interventions that we come up with ourselves aren't the only things that they're using these technologies for. They get appropriated for other things. I think it'd be interesting to spend time just noticing how these health clinics might be appropriating technologies in ways that we might not expect. How are they going to be using these things creatively? And so I'm trying to create a research project in which I have the space to observe innovation, observe these ideas as they come up. So, as a brief overview, this is my sort of in a nutshell slide. I'm implementing a project that's called Clay Mobile, and the idea is to take this paper form and move it into a phone. And we're using mobile phones as a platform for facilitating information management. The benefits of using phones instead of a paper form is that you can actually do self-verification on the phones, where paper forms, the paper is not going to tell you if you actually filled out anything wrong, and it won't be able to actually change itself if you enter in, let's say, female, it won't automatically remove any of the items that are actually only appropriate for female entry. So there's actually details here I won't go into this. This is a form for treating sexually transmitted diseases, so I won't go into all the details about what the form is for. Oops. And then we can also actually, as part of the process, they're taking these forms, filling them out in the hundreds, and then submitting them to a management agency that's located 6 hours away, and they have to hand deliver them. And so we want to move that into a GPRS-based form submission. So that basically means submitting them over an internet connection using the mobile phone service, internet-based service. And then also within the clinics themselves, giving them the capabilities to manage the forms, the information on the forms within the phone. So phone-based clinic data management. And improving the communications loop between the management agency and the health clinics that are part of the program. So I'll explain a little bit more about the program. Healthy Life is the program that I'm working with. Output-based aid is basically it's a model of financing where you reimburse service providers for the services they render. So rather than trying to set up a free clinic where you just provide free care to all the patients that walk in, what you do is you actually commission several service providers and say, for each patient that you come in, if you give us a claim form for that patient, then we'll pay you for having seen that patient for free. It's for free is not quite how it works here, but it's an approximation. But this means that for each patient that is seen in this program, you have to have paperwork. And the program management is very information intensive. And so you see different elements of the program here. This is a health clinic that's participating in the program. They brand themselves by putting in a little placard here that says Healthy Life Treatment Center, which you can see up here. And then each of the patients comes in with a Healthy Life voucher, which is that thing on the right over there. And the voucher actually comes with two sides to it: a client and a partner voucher, the blue and the green side. And it's actually treatment for initial consultation and 3 follow-up visits, so that a patient is actually tracked over 4 visits to ensure that they actually are cured. So it's not a single visit, but over time to ensure ensure continuity of care. Just a little bit of context. The area that we're working is actually Western Uganda, which is a place where sexually transmitted diseases are an especially critical problem. It's an area where there's a lot of flow of soldiers, where there's a lot of trade happening, and so it just happens to be where there's a higher prevalence of STDs than other places within Uganda. And you can see also that there's actually a fairly high density of mobile phone coverage. So in this place, there doesn't happen to be too much of a problem where you have dead zones. And so not having mobile phone coverage hasn't been a problem for me in the health clinics where I've been working. Going as an overview of the process, basically the clinics will see a patient and then they prepare the claims. They batch all the claims into batches of about 50, and then they deliver them to a management agency. Management agency then takes all the claims, enters them into a database, and then they approve all of the claims individually, and then they make a payment via EFT, basically electronic funds transfer directly into their bank, and it goes into the clinics. This takes about 60 to 90 days, depending on basically the workload of workload of the management agency, how many claims have showed up in the amount of sort of in bulk at once, and then also the number of errors in the claims. If there's an error in the claim, either it just never gets paid at all, or it gets sort of negotiated over the course of like 3 or 4 months. So it takes even longer for a payment to happen. In addition to that, like the clinics will actually sometimes wait for a good 3 to 4 months before they even submit the claim after the patient has come in, depending on how long it takes for them to get to the point where they actually have 50 claims to submit, because it actually takes a lot of effort for them to prepare a batch of claims and for them to actually get the claims from point A to point B. So from their clinic to a point where they can actually get to the point where they can get it to a management agency. So there's just a lot of sources of delays and a lot of sources of potential errors within the current claim submission process. So I spent a lot of time before I've been out to Uganda, I think at this point 3 times, and I didn't actually put any implementation in at all until this past August. And the first 2 trips were pretty much spending time in the clinics, asking them, how does this claim submission process work? What are the problems that you're facing? What are your struggles? And I mean, this is just sort of a capture of their own experiences, and just sort of a little bit about my methods. I've done clinic surveys, actually doing surveys of the same surveys with all the clinics, and also doing a lot of semi-structured interviews with the service providers. And there's a lot of lack of communication between the clinics and the service providers, which is the clinics, and the management agency, and they just really feel isolated in terms of how much information they're getting. And in terms of timely processing, they're just not getting a lot of. There's definitely a gap between what they consider to be timely processing, which is like 14 to 15 days, and what they're actually getting. So we proposed initially this claim mobile submission process, which would be basically you have a mobile phone that sits in the clinic, and it would actually directly take all of these claims that you would enter into the mobile phone and submit it directly into this database that would be sitting in the Kampala office, and receive everything, and then they would just communicate directly back and forth. Pretty basic, seems like sort of the obvious solution that would solve all the problems of communication and everything. And over the course of this past August of field work, sort of came to, this is actually sort of a really complicated diagram, but came to the realization that the social processes in the system are really complicated. So the way things work, the way that the money flows within this whole system is you have an aid agency, which gives money into this financial management agency, who then pays money to this technical management agency, which is actually the agency that manages all of the claims, processes them, and that does all the claims processing, right? And then you have this field management offices that receives all the claims and paper vouchers, all the paper claims and vouchers, and you have these health service providers. What happens is the health service providers takes all the paper claims and vouchers and submits them to this management agency, right? And then they take all these paper claims and vouchers and they submit it to this technical management agency, who's then supposed to take all of the things, put them in the database, and ship these claim summary reports, copies of them, to this financial management agency and to this field office. The financial management agency then takes the money from the aid agency and then pays the health service providers based off of these claim summary reports. And then they also pay the technical management agency for having done the work. And they also pay the field office for having done the work. And so that sort of all works. Everything's sort of disconnected up until the point where the financial management agency forgets to pay the technical management agency for the work they've done, and the technical management agency just sort of stops doing the work and stops sending out claim summary reports. But that's sort of neither here nor there. So what happens is if what I do is take this thing and have them just submit the claims directly from, like just bypass this paper process entirely and submit via the mobile phone directly to this technical management agency where the database is, I've completely skipped this management office. And this management office suddenly doesn't get any of these claims. And so that's something where at face value, when I originally designed the implementation, where I talked to people in the management agency, and the first 2 visits, came up with this whole design, everybody's like, oh yeah, that's exactly the way to do it. And so I came up with the whole design, and I pitched it to them, and they were like, oh yeah, that's exactly the way to do it. And I did it that way. And I realized that would be very, like in the middle of August, I realized that would be very, 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 very broken. And I talked to the people in the management office, and they're like, oh, is that the way it's going to happen? Okay. And they just sort of accepted it. And I said, oh. And there's this thing when you're doing field work where people don't say no to you. And so this is something where I like being a researcher that can just sit there and listen and spend time observing and reflect about like what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and where I am. And so I decided to just totally revamp the entire design and the entire infrastructure of the system and introduce a new component, set up a web interface, and decided that the mobile phones were all going to talk to this web interface, this independent web interface, that all of these different subsystems were actually going to be able to integrate with this web interface, that the database at the technical management agency was actually going to talk to the web interface, and the mobile phone wasn't going to talk to the database directly, but it was going to talk to the web interface. And so I wanted to basically say, well, let's kind of deal not just with this problem of getting the information from point A to point B, but let's deal with the problem of information flows within this entire ecosystem. And so moving from here, where was I? Oh, there's animation that I didn't expect. So this is an overview of what the mobile application looks like. And so in the middle you have the original paper claim form, and these are just sort of screenshots of what the phone screenshots look like. Just to break it down a little bit, there's claim submission, and all the patient data is just sort of entered in on the forms, and it's just meant to model exactly the paper form, but with the additional caveats that we can do cross-checking against other forms and do we can do cross-checking against other forms and against other data within the form. And then you can do, there's feedback options where you can actually, for each form, communicate with the management agency on the status of the form and get feedback on each individual form, whether it's been accepted or not. There's also a list of claims where you can just manage the status and view the status of each claim and do cross-checking. They're sort of anonymized. We're thinking about like paper versus digital and seeing if there's a way to kind of out-of-band integrate with paper forms, just because there's a lot of authentication mechanisms that are part of the current process that are a little bit hard to take out of the process. And this is just sort of screenshots of the web-based application and how they've just sort of been inspired by some of the paper-based processes that are already there. And this is just sort of a timeline of my field work, the stuff that I've already done, and then I'll be there for all of next calendar year, basically doing a deployment for the first 6 months, and then spending another 6 months just sort of observing what happens in the health clinics once the application's deployed. And just a sort of shout out to all of my funders and the rest of the tier group. So.
In your flow chart, you have the website going to all of the local healthcare center. So I'm assuming they'll have computers and power and internet connectivity.
There,
Yeah. The interface goes to everyone except for HSP.
The web interface does go to the health service provider. They do have internet connectivity through the mobile phone. So, and some of them do have internet connectivity if they're willing to pay for it. It really just depends on the health clinic. What I like about the project is actually there's a really large diversity in the kinds of health clinics I'm going to be working with. Some of them are rural, some of them are urban. So the rural ones tend to not have as many resources, of course, but so they won't necessarily have internet connectivity, and they would actually generally be paying for their own internet usage if they choose to use it.